He didn't raise his voice, didn't cause a scene. All it took was one phone call, and the owner nearly lost it. You ever do something simple, something normal, but end up walking straight into a moment that shifts everything? That's exactly what happened the day Darnell showed up for lunch. Now, Darnell wasn't the kind of guy people paid much attention to. He liked it that way. He ran his shop, Whitaker's Auto Repair, just off Highway 40, about 20 minutes outside St. Louis in a town called Union. The place was nothing fancy, a low brick building with a hand-painted sign, 3 bays, and a small waiting room that smelled like motor oil and cheap coffee. But folks around there, they knew Darnell could fix just about anything with wheels. Didn't matter if it was a 99 Civic with a bad alternator or a restored 67 Chevelle with engine trouble. Darnell would figure it out. He lived quiet, worked hard, kept to himself. People liked him because he didn't pretend. You brought your car in, he gave you the truth, even if you didn't like it. He charged fair, stayed late, and knew every kid on the high school football team by name, because half of them worked summer shifts at the shop changing tires and learning how to rebuild brake calipers. But that day wasn't supposed to be about work. It was about his wife, Rochelle. She'd been dropping hints all week, how it had been too long since they'd had a real date, how her friend Camille said this new French spot in Clayton was absolutely divine. So Darnell made a plan, got one of the guys to cover the afternoon shift, cleaned up as best he could, washed his face, changed into a clean pair of navy coveralls, ran some water through his hair, but time got away from him. That morning, a tow truck brought in an F-150 with a busted transmission. It belonged to an older couple on a fixed income. Darnell didn't have the heart to let it sit, so he stayed late making sure it ran smooth. When he finally checked the clock, it was already past noon. He didn't have time to go home and change. Rochelle was waiting. He tossed his rag in the bin, grabbed his truck keys, and headed out. The restaurant, Maison Aurel, sat on the corner of Forsyth and Brentwood. High-end place. Windows so clean they looked invisible. A valet stood out front in a crisp white shirt, looking like he hadn't turned a wrench a day in his life. Darnell pulled up in his old Silverado, and heads turned the moment he stepped out. Grease under his fingernails, work boots scuffed from years on concrete. His coveralls were clean, but they still told a story. One look, and folks already thought they knew who he was. But inside, that man was smiling ear to ear. He walked in, scanned the room, and there she was, Rochelle, sitting near the window, dressed in soft blue, hair pinned back, glowing like the first time he saw her at a 4th of July cookout 16 years ago. She stood when she saw him, smiling back. But then she paused, because before Darnell could take another step, a young hostess intercepted him. Thin girl, early 20s, hair pulled into a bun so tight you could see the stress behind her eyes. Hi, can I help you? She asked, her voice light but her body language sharp. I've got a reservation, Darnell said, still smiling. Whitaker, table for 2 at 1. She looked him over, his boots, his name patch, his hands. Then she leaned slightly forward and asked, Are you here to make a delivery? Darnell blinked. No, ma'am. I'm here to eat. Rochelle took a step forward but stopped. Something about the way the hostess tilted her head, the way she didn't even glance at the reservation book, made her stomach twist. Oh, the hostess said, it's just, we do have a dress code, and, well... She looked around nervously, as if expecting someone to step in. I see, Darnell replied, calm, not cold, just still. Well, I wouldn't want to make anyone uncomfortable. He walked over to Rochelle, touched her hand. Let's go somewhere else. She nodded without saying a word. The two of them turned and walked out, his boots loud against the marble floor. But outside, standing by his truck, Darnell pulled out his phone. Not to vent, not to yell, but to call a man who owed him a favor. And that's when the story really started. The thing about Darnell was, he didn't raise his voice. Not when folks talked down to him. Not when a supplier tried to short him on parts. Not even when a customer tried to skip out on a bill. He handled things the way he handled broken engines. Quietly, carefully, and with precision. But that didn't mean he didn't feel it. Back in the truck, Rochelle sat in the passenger seat, silent for a moment, staring out the window. She turned to him, eyes soft. You okay? She asked. Darnell nodded, shifting into reverse. I'm fine. Just didn't want to ruin your lunch. She placed her hand on his arm. You didn't. They did. He didn't respond, just kept driving. But inside, it was still eating at him. Not just the embarrassment. He could handle that. He'd been dealing with that kind of thing his whole life. It was the way they looked at him, like he was something out of place, like he wasn't supposed to be there. Not because he caused a problem, not because he said something wrong, just because of how he looked, because of what he wore, because of what they assumed. They pulled into a small diner off Manchester Road. Nothing fancy. Worn booths, smell of bacon grease in the air. But the waitress smiled, called Rochelle sweetheart, and brought Darnell a sweet tea without asking. They sat, they laughed. The food came fast and hot. But midway through his sandwich, Darnell leaned back in the booth and said, "You know who owns that French place?" Rochelle looked up. "No, you do?" He nodded. Not the name on the door, but one of the investors. "Ronald Beckett. You remember him?" "Isn't that the guy with all the Porsches?" "Yep, 5 of them. One for every day of the week he works from home." She raised her eyebrows. "You think he knows how they treated you?" Darnell didn't answer, just pulled out his phone and scrolled to Ronald's contact, tapped the name, put it on speaker. It rang once, twice. "Darnell," Ronald's voice boomed through the speaker. "What's going on, man? You got the new filters in yet?" "Yeah, they came in this morning. But listen, I need a minute of your time." "Sure, shoot." "I went to that restaurant you talked about, Maison Aurel." "Oh, fancy spot. Rochelle like it?" Darnell glanced at his wife. "We didn't stay long." There was a pause. "What happened?" "We had a reservation for 1 o'clock. I walked in, they didn't even check the list. Girl asked if I was making a delivery. Told me they had a dress code. Told us to leave." The line went silent. "You're joking." "Nope. I'm one of their top investors," Ronald said, voice low now. "You're telling me they turned you away?" Darnell leaned forward. "I didn't call to complain. I just figured maybe next time you go in there, you let them know the guy who keeps your classic cars running. That was me." Ronald didn't speak for a beat. Then, "Where are you right now?" "Lunch. Local place down the road." "Stay there. Don't move. I'll take care of it." But Ronald didn't just make a call. He got in his car, put his foot on the gas, and decided some people needed a face-to-face reminder of who really keeps the engine running. It wasn't the first time Darnell had been judged before he opened his mouth, but this one hit different, because he had done everything right. He worked hard, took care of people, paid his taxes, gave discounts to seniors, hired local kids and taught them how to make an honest living. He didn't ask for handouts, didn't expect applause. He just wanted a quiet lunch with his wife. A small moment, nothing more. But someone decided he didn't belong, not because he caused a problem, just because he looked like one. That stung. Meanwhile, back at Maison Aurel, things were about to get interesting. Ronald Beckett didn't call ahead. He didn't want to give anyone time to clean things up. He wanted to see it just the way it was. He pulled up in his silver Porsche 911, immaculate, detailed, humming like a brand new engine. The valet jumped up like he saw royalty. "Mr. Beckett, welcome back." Ronald didn't smile. "Keys stay with me." "Yes, sir." He walked through the tall glass doors and straight to the hostess stand. The same young woman from earlier was there, tapping on a tablet. She looked up, about to greet him, and then froze when she recognized his face. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to Maison Aurel." "Where's the manager?" He's in the back. Would you like me to—" "Get him, now." She blinked, then hurried off. Behind her, servers whispered. A couple of them knew who Ronald was, knew he didn't show up for random check-ins, knew this wasn't going to be a friendly drop-by. A tall man in a navy suit came rushing out. Name tag read Clive Jackson, general manager. "Mr. Beckett, what a surprise. Can I help you?" Ronald didn't waste a second. "I want to talk about what happened at 1 o'clock today." Clive's face twitched. 1 o'clock? "You turned away a man, Darnell Whitaker. He had a reservation. Came in to eat lunch with his wife. One of your staff decided he didn't fit the image." Clive hesitated. I believe there may have been some confusion. We have a dress code, and—" "He's a mechanic," Ronald cut in. "He came straight from work. You think the guy who keeps my collection on the road should have to change clothes just to sit down and eat lunch with his wife?" Clive tried to smile. "Of course not, sir. If we had known—" "That's the problem. Ronald said, voice flat. You didn't care to know. Behind him, the restaurant had gone quiet. Tables of well-dressed diners pretended not to stare. One server dropped a tray of silverware. Ronald leaned in slightly. You looked at that man and decided he didn't belong. That's not a dress code issue. That's a respect issue. And I'm telling you right now, if I ever hear about something like this again, I'll pull every penny out of this place and make sure every partner does the same. Clive swallowed hard. We're deeply sorry, Mr. Beckett. Truly. I'll personally call Mr. Whitaker and extend our apologies. We'll comp their meal. He's not coming back for a free meal, Ronald snapped. He doesn't need your charity. He deserves your respect. He turned to leave, then paused. Here's what you are going to do. You're going to train your staff, all of them, not on customer service, on humility, on judgment, on how to stop assuming you can tell who somebody is by looking at their shoes. With that, he walked out, got back in his car, and drove off. But while the restaurant scrambled to save face, Darnell and Rochelle were still at the diner, sharing pie and laughter, proving that peace doesn't always come from being seated, but from standing tall. Darnell didn't check his phone until the check came. The waitress, a woman named Jo, gray ponytail, quick smile, slipped the bill onto the table with a wink. You all take your time, no rush. He smiled back. Appreciate you. Rochelle watched him quietly as he picked up his phone. Missed call, voicemail, text from Ronald, handled, I'll call you later, shouldn't happen again. Darnell didn't say anything at first, just stared at the screen. Did he call? Rochelle asked. Yeah, said it's handled. What does that even mean? He shrugged. Don't know. Don't care too much either. Rochelle folded her arms, leaned back in the booth. He stood up for you, she said. That means something. Maybe, Darnell said, but it doesn't change what happened. She nodded, not arguing, just letting that truth sit between them. You know what gets me? He said after a while, eyes still on his tea glass. We were sitting there, minding our business, and that girl looked at me like I wandered in through the kitchen, like I didn't belong on the other side of the counter. Rochelle reached for his hand. You do belong, anywhere you want to be. He gave her a half smile. Yeah, I know, but it's crazy, isn't it? You can build a life from scratch, run a business for 15 years, raise kids, fix other people's problems day in, day out, and all they see is a man with grease on his sleeves. Rochelle's voice was steady. Then maybe it's time they start seeing something else. He looked up. She nodded toward his phone. Call him back. Darnell hated drama. He didn't like attention, but he knew Rochelle was right. Ignoring this didn't fix anything. And maybe, just maybe, saying something would stop it from happening to the next man who walked through those same doors in work boots. He tapped Ronald's name again. This time, the voice came through before the first ring ended. Hey, you all right? I'm good, Darnell said. Appreciate what you did. Man, listen, Ronald said, tone lower now. What they did wasn't just disrespectful. It was stupid. That manager's lucky I didn't clear house. You don't need to do all that, Darnell replied. I'm not asking for blood. I just want them to learn something. They will. Trust me. I made it clear. You don't treat anybody like that, but especially not the guy who kept my Carrera from choking at high rev last summer. Darnell laughed under his breath. You were really about to sell that car too. Until you fixed it like magic. That's why I did what I did. There was a pause. But I also did it, Ronald added, because I was embarrassed. Embarrassed that people I trusted to represent my business acted like that. I don't want my name tied to that kind of place if that's how they treat people. I hear you. You ever want to go back? Ronald asked. Real question, I can make it happen. Darnell was quiet for a second. Honestly, I don't need them. I got Rochelle, I got good food in front of me, and I got folks who see me for who I really am. That's all I want. Ronald let out a long breath. Fair enough. You did what mattered, Darnell said. You said something. That's more than most. I'll keep saying something, Ronald replied. They'll remember this. That's a promise. But Darnell wasn't after promises. He was after progress. And he knew it wouldn't happen all at once, but sometimes all it takes is one moment to shift the gears. The sun was low by the time Darnell pulled the truck back into the shop lot. The bay doors were shut, the lights off inside. Quiet now. Just the hum of a few cicadas and the sound of gravel crunching beneath his boots as he stepped out. Rochelle leaned against the passenger side door, arms crossed, watching him. "You coming in?" he asked. She grinned. "Not unless you were fixing pie in there." He chuckled and nodded toward the small office. "Come on, I got peach cobbler in the fridge from Mrs. Baxter. Said I saved her transmission, so I earned dessert." She followed him inside. The shop smelled like it always did. Rubber, coolant, grease, a little sweat. But it felt different today, like the air had cleared. He pulled out the foil-wrapped dish, grabbed 2 forks, and they sat in the folding chairs by the front counter, sharing bites straight from the tray like they had when they were first married and broke. "I was thinking," Rochelle said between bites, "about what you said at lunch, how they only saw what you wore." He nodded. "But that's the problem, right? Some people only know one kind of power. If you don't come wrapped in money or dressed in their idea of success, they think you're nobody." Darnell leaned back. "Let me tell you something. Last week, a banker brought in his Lexus, said the engine light came on, wanted it done fast. I told him, you can rush money, but you can't rush timing belts. He laughed like it was a joke, then called me the next day when it wouldn't start. You know what he said?" "What?" "I should have listened to you. You know more about this stuff than I ever will." Rochelle smiled. "That's the truth. Point is, he said, money don't make you smart, and it sure don't make you right. Or decent." "Exactly." They sat in silence for a minute. Then Darnell said, "You remember when we started this place, that first winter when we didn't even have proper heat in the office?" She laughed. "We wore gloves to do the books. We built this from nothing," he said, voice lower now. "No loans, no help, just grit. So if someone like that hostess can look at me and not see value, that's her loss, not mine." Rochelle nodded slowly. "Still hurts, though." "Yeah," he said. "It does." He looked around at the shop, the racks, the toolboxes, the walls covered in thank you notes and Polaroids from customers over the years. Kids who learned how to change oil here, grandmas who baked him pies every Christmas. This place didn't shine like a French restaurant. It didn't have mood lighting or imported marble. But everything in it, it was real, earned, respected. And the truth was, Darnell didn't need to be seated in a fancy dining room to prove his worth, because every inch of that shop was his table. Every customer who walked through the door knew they could trust him, and no manager in a tailored suit could take that from him. But while Darnell sat in his shop, eating cobbler with the woman who'd seen it all, the restaurant staff across town were rewriting their rulebook, because one quiet man in coveralls had shaken their idea of power without ever raising his voice. By Monday, word had spread. The manager at Maison Aurel called Darnell personally, left a voicemail, then another one, said he wanted to extend a heartfelt apology, said the hostess was retrained, said they were deeply embarrassed. But Darnell never called back. Not because he was holding a grudge. He just didn't need a script. He didn't need a PR spin. He didn't need a free appetizer. He already had what mattered. That weekend, a teenager named Malik, one of Darnell's part-time shop hands, showed up early, carrying a takeout bag. "Got you something," he said. Darnell raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" "Chicken parmesan, from that Italian spot by the highway. Saw what happened online. Figured you deserve better than that mess." Darnell grinned. "Appreciate that, son." Malik stood by the door, then asked, "Mr. D, you ever think about closing this place and doing something bigger? Like, fancier?" Darnell looked around at the shop again, thought about the chipped paint, the busted radio in the corner, the coffee maker that needed a hard slap to start. "No," he said. "This is big. Bigger than a fancy name on a building." Malik nodded, slowly understanding. "People think respect comes from money," Darnell added. "But the truth is, you can be rich and still treat folks like trash. Or you can wear grease on your hands and walk like a king." Malik smiled. "You kinda do walk like that, Mr. D." Darnell laughed, tossing him a rag. "Now get back to that tire rotation before you start thinking you the boss." Later that afternoon, Rochelle stopped by with sweet tea. They sat in the lot, watching the sunset wash the pavement in gold. "You still thinking about it?" she asked. He shook his head. "Nah, I'm good. Let them keep their white tablecloths. I got better company right here." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and just like that, the world kept spinning. Because in the end, Darnell didn't need validation from a restaurant. He didn't need to prove he belonged. He knew who he was, and the lesson he left behind, it echoed louder than any raised voice. Respect doesn't come from how much you spend. It comes from how much you see, and how much you choose to understand. We all carry judgments we don't always realize, but sometimes it takes one moment, one quiet man in work boots, to remind us that real worth isn't loud. It's steady, it's earned, and it can't be worn or washed off. So next time you see someone who looks different than you expect in a certain space, ask yourself, are you seeing a person or just an image? If this story hit you in any way, take a second to share it. Talk about it. Tell someone. Because the world doesn't change through noise. It changes when good people say, "That's not right," and do something about it.